The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal as Sarah Thompson strode through the sliding glass doors, her Louis Vuitton-wheeled carry-on gliding silently behind her. At 35, she had become one of the most respected names in the tech industry, building her cybersecurity company from the ground up into a $500 million enterprise. Today was supposed to be a routine flight to a speaking engagement in Seattle, but fate had other plans. Sarah checked her Apple Watch, 7:45 a.m., perfectly on schedule as always. Her fitted navy blazer, cream silk blouse, and tailored black pants reflected the polished image she had carefully cultivated over years of breaking barriers in the male-dominated tech world. Her natural hair was styled in elegant twisted locks, completing her professional appearance. The private terminal was quiet at this hour, with only a few other passengers scattered around the exclusive waiting area. The smell of premium coffee wafted from the luxury lounge, mixing with the supple scent of leather from the designer furniture. Everything about the space spoke of privilege and exclusivity, a world Sarah had earned her place in through years of dedication and brilliant innovation. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed the guard's expression shift. James Miller, according to his nameplate, straightened up from his previously relaxed posture. His eyes narrowed slightly as they focused on her, a change so subtle that most might have missed it. But Sarah had seen that look too many times not to recognize it. "Good morning," Sarah said professionally, already reaching for her ID and flight documentation. She had learned long ago to be overprepared, especially in spaces where people might question her belonging. Her pilot had already filed all the necessary paperwork, and her regular status at this terminal meant her credentials were well established. Miller barely acknowledged her greeting. "ID and flight authorization," he demanded, his tone notably different from the casual good mornings she heard him offering to previous passengers while she'd been waiting in line. Sarah handed over her documentation, her driver's license, the flight authorization, and even her company ID, though it wasn't required. She had her pilot's contact information ready on her phone, anticipating what often came next. "This doesn't look right," Miller said, squinting at her ID with exaggerated suspicion. Behind Sarah, a white businessman walked through the security checkpoint with barely a glance from Miller's colleague, his ID checked so quickly it might as well have been a library card. "Everything is in order," Sarah replied calmly, maintaining her professional demeanor. "I'm a regular client here. You can verify with the flight crew. They're expecting me." Miller made a show of scrutinizing every document, holding them up to the light, checking and rechecking details that were clearly visible. "We have strict protocols here," he said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "This is a private aviation facility. We need to be absolutely certain about who we're letting through." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from her pilot asking if everything was all right. They were used to her punctuality, and she was now running behind schedule. She kept her breathing steady, but her hand instinctively moved to her phone's camera. Years of experience had taught her the importance of documentation. "Of course," she responded evenly. "Would you like to call my pilot? Or perhaps the terminal manager? I'm sure either would be happy to verify my identity and authorization." Her voice remained professional, but her words carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what was happening, and exactly how to handle it. Around them, the terminal's activity continued, but Sarah noticed several passengers and staff members beginning to pay attention to the prolonged interaction. A young employee behind the coffee counter watched with visible concern, while a couple waiting nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Miller shuffled through her documents again, his excuses becoming more elaborate. "The signature on this authorization looks unusual," he claimed, though it was the same electronic signature used on all flight documents. "And your company ID could be from anywhere. We need additional verification." Sarah checked her watch again, 8:05 a.m., 20 minutes had passed, and she was still standing at the security checkpoint while others flowed through freely. The morning light now streamed fully through the terminal's tall windows, illuminating the scene in harsh clarity. What might have been subtle discrimination in shadows was now being performed in broad daylight, and Sarah knew exactly what her next steps needed to be. She took a slow, deliberate breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared for what was coming. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such treatment, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But today, something was different. Today, she wasn't just going to endure it. She was going to ensure it became a catalyst for change. Sarah's fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, sending a quick message to her pilot. Security situation at checkpoint. Please alert terminal management. She then opened her camera app, letting it record discreetly by her side. Years of experience had taught her that documentation was often the strongest weapon against discrimination. Mr. Miller. Sarah spoke clearly, making sure her voice would be picked up by the recording. I've been a client at this terminal for 3 years now. I fly out of here twice a month. Could you please explain exactly what additional verification you need? The guard shifted uncomfortably, aware of the growing audience around them. 2 more passengers had joined the line behind Sarah, both watching the scene unfold with increasing interest. One of them, a middle-aged white woman in a business suit, had a puzzled expression as she witnessed the excessive scrutiny being applied to Sarah's documents. It's just standard procedure, Miller muttered, though his confidence was starting to crack. We need to verify the authenticity of these documents. Private aviation has strict security protocols. Just then, a well-dressed man breezed past them at the adjacent security lane. Miller's colleague barely glanced at his ID before waving him through with a friendly nod. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Those would be the same protocols that gentleman just went through. She asked pointedly, because I noticed his ID check took approximately 5 seconds, while I've been standing here for. She checked her watch, 27 minutes now. Miller's face reddened. Each case is different, he stammered, but his excuses were growing weaker. We have to be thorough when something doesn't look right. And what exactly doesn't look right? Sarah pressed, her voice steady but firm. My valid government-issued ID. My flight authorization that matches every requirement. Or is it something else entirely, Mr. Miller? The terminal had grown quieter now, the usual morning bustle dampened by the tension at the security checkpoint. A young staff member behind the coffee counter had pulled out her phone, discreetly filming the interaction. Sarah noticed but kept her focus on Miller. Just then, her phone buzzed with a response from her pilot, Captain Anderson, terminal manager David Chen on his way down. Hold tight. Miller must have sensed reinforcements were coming because he suddenly became more aggressive in his obstruction. Listen, if you're going to question our security procedures, maybe we should just cancel your flight authorization altogether. We have the right to deny access to anyone who poses a security risk. Sarah's expression remained composed, but her voice carried steel. Please clarify what security risk I pose, Mr. Miller. I'd like you to be very specific for the record. The businessman who had passed through earlier had stopped at the nearby coffee shop, but was now watching the scene intently. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. Excuse me, but I couldn't help noticing. I've seen Miss Thompson here several times before. She's a regular passenger. Miller's face contorted with frustration. Sir, this is a security matter. Please step back. It certainly is a security matter, came a new voice. David Chen, the terminal manager, strode purposefully toward the checkpoint. His expression was grave as he took in the scene. Sarah's perfectly arranged documentation still spread across the counter, Miller's flustered demeanor, and the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered. Miss Thompson, I sincerely apologize for any delay, Chen said, shooting a sharp look at Miller. I've reviewed the security footage of the past 30 minutes, and I have some serious concerns about what I've observed. Miller's face went pale. Sir, I was just following. Following what exactly? Chen cut him off. Because I've watched 6 other passengers clear security during this same time period, none of whom received this level of thoroughness. The last word carried a weight of irony that made Miller flinch. Sarah gathered her documents with deliberate calm. Mr. Chen, I believe we need to have a serious discussion about security protocols and their equal application to all passengers. I'd be happy to share the video documentation I collected this morning, along with my experiences over the past few months. Chen nodded gravely. My office, right now, and Mr. Miller, he turned to the guard, who seemed to be shrinking into his uniform. Consider yourself suspended pending a full investigation. Please surrender your security badge to Supervisor Roberts immediately. The morning sun now filled the terminal completely, illuminating the scene in unforgiving clarity. As Sarah finally moved past the checkpoint, other passengers nodded to her in solidarity. She walked with her head high, her wheeled carry-on clicking against the polished floor, not just a passenger now, but a catalyst for necessary change. David Chen's office was a stark contrast to the bustling terminal outside. Warm wood paneling and soft lighting created an atmosphere of calm, but the tension in the room remained palpable. Sarah sat across from Chen at his desk, her phone placed between them, the screen showing the recorded video of her encounter with Miller. "Miss Thompson," Chen began, his fingers steepled in front of him, "I want you to know that what happened out there is completely unacceptable. But I suspect this isn't the first time you've experienced this here." Sarah pulled out her tablet and opened a carefully organized folder. "You're right, Mr. Chen. I've been documenting similar incidents for the past 6 months." She placed the tablet on his desk, showing a spreadsheet with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of previous encounters. While Miller was the most blatant, there's been a pattern of discriminatory behavior among certain security staff. Chen's face grew increasingly troubled as he scrolled through the data. The spreadsheet showed that Sarah's average security check took 15 minutes longer than other passengers, and she was 3 times more likely to be asked for additional documentation. "The numbers speak for themselves," Sarah continued, her voice professional but firm. "I didn't want to raise this issue without substantial evidence. As a tech CEO, I believe in data-driven decisions, and this data tells a clear story." A knock on the door interrupted them. Captain Anderson, Sarah's pilot, entered the office looking concerned. "Miss Thompson, we've delayed the flight. We should discuss rescheduling. Also," he turned to Chen, "I've witnessed some of these incidents myself. Several times, I had to come down to verify Ms. Thompson's identity, something I've never had to do for any other client." Chen ran a hand over his face, looking both embarrassed and determined. "This requires immediate action. Miss Thompson, I'm not just talking about disciplinary measures against Miller. We need systemic changes." Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I thought you might say that. I took the liberty of preparing some recommendations." She handed him a document titled Proposed Security Protocol Reforms. "You came prepared," Chen said, looking impressed as he scanned the document. "In my experience, it's not enough to simply react to incidents," Sarah explained. "We need proactive measures to prevent them. My proposal includes mandatory bias training, regular audit reviews of security interactions, and clear accountability metrics." Outside the office, they could hear the regular activities of the terminal continuing, the soft chatter of passengers, the rolling of luggage, the distant sound of aircraft engines. But in here, something important was taking shape. "These are excellent proposals," Chen said, studying the document carefully. "But implementing them will require significant resources and commitment." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Chen, this terminal serves some of the most influential business leaders in the country. If we can't set the standard for equitable treatment here, where can we?" Captain Anderson nodded in agreement. "The private aviation industry talks a lot about exclusive service. Shouldn't that exclusivity extend to having the highest standards of professional conduct?" Chen stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the airfield where several private jets sat gleaming in the morning sun. After a moment, he turned back to Sarah. "You're absolutely right. I'd like to take your proposals even further. Would you be willing to serve on a newly formed advisory board? We need voices like yours to guide these changes." Sarah smiled for the first time that morning. "I would be honored. But I want to be clear. This isn't just about improving my personal experience. It's about ensuring every passenger is treated with the same respect, regardless of their appearance." "Agreed," Chen said firmly. He pressed his intercom button. "Janet, please contact HR immediately. We need to schedule a full staff meeting for this afternoon. And get me the contact information for that consulting firm that specializes in diversity training." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. A video of her confrontation with Miller had already started circulating on social media, posted by one of the witnessing passengers. The clip was gaining traction quickly, with comments pouring in from people sharing similar experiences. Sarah showed the phone to Chen. "It seems the conversation is already starting. The question is, will this terminal be remembered as part of the problem, or as an example of the solution?" Chen straightened his shoulders. "Miss Thompson, with your help, I intend to make sure it's the latter. Now, about your flight. Please allow us to arrange a new departure time at your convenience, with our deepest apologies for today's delay." The afternoon sun blazed through the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows as Sarah finally boarded her rescheduled flight. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the video went viral, messages of support, media requests, and surprisingly, emails from other private aviation companies wanting to discuss their own security protocols. As she settled into the plush leather seat of her private jet, Sarah opened her laptop to read some of the responses. The video had reached over 1 million views in just a few hours. The comments section was filled with stories from other successful professionals who had faced similar discrimination at various airports and private terminals. "Miss Thompson," Captain Anderson said, entering the cabin, "we're ready for takeoff. There's something you might want to see first." He handed her his tablet, showing a live news broadcast. The headline read, "Discrimination at Elite Aviation Terminal Sparks Industry-Wide Debate." Sarah watched as security footage from the terminal played on the screen, showing Miller's discriminatory behavior from multiple angles. The reporter was interviewing David Chen, who looked directly into the camera with determination. "What happened this morning was inexcusable," Chen said on the broadcast. "We're taking immediate action. Thanks to Ms. Thompson's guidance, we're implementing comprehensive reforms that will set a new standard for the private aviation industry." The story cut to aviation industry experts discussing the broader implications. One analyst pointed out that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a larger problem in exclusive spaces like private aviation terminals. Sarah's assistant had already received calls from 3 major business networks requesting interviews. Her company's social media team reported that their followers had increased by 50,000 since morning, with many praising her composed handling of the situation. "Your flight plan is set," Captain Anderson informed her, "but there's something else. The staff wanted you to see this." He pulled up another video on his tablet, this one showing the terminal's afternoon staff meeting that had just concluded. In the video, over 50 employees sat in the terminal's conference room as David Chen outlined the new security protocols. The camera panned across faces showing various emotions, some uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement, and many looking genuinely motivated to create change. Starting today, Chen announced in the video, every security check will be recorded and reviewed weekly for consistency. "We're installing new cameras with better angles, implementing a feedback system for passengers, and most importantly, creating a diverse advisory board to oversee these changes." Sarah noticed some of the staff who had witnessed her confrontation with Miller were now actively participating in the discussion, suggesting additional improvements to the security process. The young woman who had filmed the incident was now appointed as part of the new oversight committee. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her company's board of directors. They were unanimously supporting her decision to become part of the terminal's advisory board, seeing it as an opportunity to address systemic discrimination in corporate spaces. As the jet engines began their gentle hum, Sarah received one final email that made her smile. It was from the businessman who had spoken up during the confrontation. He represented a major investment firm, and they wanted to discuss implementing similar anti-discrimination protocols across their entire business network. "We're ready for takeoff, Miss Thompson," Captain Anderson announced, returning to the cockpit. "Flight time to Seattle will be approximately 3 hours." Sarah looked out the window at the terminal building. She could see Chen in his office, already in a meeting with what appeared to be diversity training consultants. The security checkpoint where everything had started was now staffed by different guards, all of them noticeably more professional and consistent in their treatment of passengers. As the jet taxied toward the runway, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing. Her speaking engagement in Seattle was about innovation in technology, but she knew now that she needed to address something bigger. She added a new slide to her presentation titled "Breaking Barriers: Innovation in Corporate Culture." The plane lifted off smoothly into the afternoon sky. Below, the terminal grew smaller, but its impact on Sarah's life, and potentially the entire private aviation industry, had only begun to grow. Her quiet stand against discrimination had sparked a conversation that was now spreading far beyond one security checkpoint at one private terminal. The flight attendant offered her a glass of water, and Sarah took a moment to reflect. Sometimes the most important innovations weren't in technology, but in human behavior and institutional change. As her jet climbed through the clouds, she knew that this morning's incident, though difficult, would serve as a catalyst for meaningful transformation. The Seattle Technology Conference was packed with industry leaders, but the buzz wasn't just about new software or revolutionary apps. As Sarah stepped onto the stage for her keynote speech, the enormous conference hall fell silent. The audience knew they were about to hear from someone who had become an overnight catalyst for change in corporate America. Innovation isn't just about creating new technology, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. Sometimes, it's about transforming the spaces where we work and travel. The screen behind her showed statistics about discrimination in corporate and luxury spaces, including private aviation terminals. In the front row, David Chen sat watching intently. He had flown in specifically for this conference, not just to support Sarah, but to participate in a panel discussion about implementing institutional changes. The incident at his terminal had occurred just 3 days ago, but its ripple effects were already reshaping policies across the country. Yesterday, I received calls from 12 different corporate aviation companies, Sarah continued, clicking to her next slide. They'd all asked the same question: how can we prevent what happened at that terminal from happening in our facilities? The audience was completely engaged, many taking notes as Sarah shared her comprehensive plan for corporate reform. She had turned her experience into a template for change, complete with specific steps companies could take to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices. In the middle of her presentation, Sarah's phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. It was a message from her assistant. Miller, the former security guard, had just appeared on a morning news show to issue a public apology. But more importantly, he was now working with anti-bias training programs, sharing his story as an example of how unconscious prejudice could affect decision-making. Real change, Sarah told her audience, happens when we turn negative experiences into positive action. The terminal where I faced discrimination is now implementing some of the most progressive security protocols in the industry. She shared screenshots of the new security checkpoint system being installed at Chen's terminal. Every interaction was now recorded from multiple angles, with AI software monitoring for consistency in how different passengers were treated. The system also tracked wait times and additional security requests, flagging any patterns that might indicate bias. In the audience, several CEOs nodded in agreement as Sarah explained how these changes were actually improving efficiency. The new protocols weren't just more equitable, they were also streamlining the security process for everyone. But technology alone isn't the answer, Sarah emphasized, moving to her next point. We need human commitment to change. She showed a photo of the terminal's new diverse advisory board, which included business leaders, security experts, and civil rights advocates. After her speech, during the Q&A session, a young black woman stood up. "Ms. Thompson," she said, her voice slightly shaking, "I'm a junior executive, and I faced similar situations but never had the courage to speak up. What advice would you give to others in similar situations?" Sarah's response was thoughtful. Document everything. Build allies. And remember, your presence in these spaces isn't just about you. It's about creating pathways for others. The audience erupted in applause. As the conference broke for lunch, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her company's board. They wanted to create a new division specifically focused on corporate diversity and security consulting. The demand for such services had exploded since her story went viral. David Chen caught up with Sarah as she left the stage. "The changes we implemented are already making a difference," he reported excitedly. "Our passenger satisfaction scores have increased by 30% in just 3 days. Other terminals are calling us for advice." Sarah smiled, remembering how different things had been just a few days ago. The discriminatory incident that could have been just another frustrating experience had instead become a turning point, not just for one terminal or one industry, but for corporate culture as a whole. As she walked through the conference center, several people stopped to shake her hand or share their own stories. Each conversation reinforced what she already knew. Sometimes it took one person standing firm in their truth to create a wave of change that others could ride toward progress. Looking at her schedule for the rest of the conference, Sarah noticed that her original technology presentation had been expanded into 3 separate sessions, all focused on implementing systematic changes in corporate environments. What started as one woman's stand against discrimination had grown into a movement for institutional reform. 1 week after the Seattle Technology Conference, Sarah sat in her company's boardroom, surrounded by executives from 5 major airlines. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the determination on their faces as they reviewed her proposed changes to their security protocols. "What happened at that private terminal could have happened at any of our airports," said Michael Roberts, the CEO of Western Airlines. "We need to get ahead of this issue." He held up a tablet showing more viral videos of similar incidents at various airports across the country. Sarah's story had encouraged others to share their experiences. Jessica Chang, head of security for Pacific Air, spread out several documents on the polished conference table. "Our current training programs clearly aren't enough. Ms. Thompson, your data-driven approach to tracking discriminatory behavior is exactly what we need." Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the latest statistics from David Chen's terminal. In just 1 week since implementing the new systems, they've seen a 40% decrease in security checkpoint delays and 0 complaints about discriminatory treatment. The room buzzed with interest as Sarah showed them the real-time monitoring system she had helped develop. Security cameras now used AI to analyze passenger interactions, measuring factors like wait times, body language, and consistency of document checks across different demographics. But technology is just part of the solution, Sarah emphasized, moving to her next point. "We need to change the culture from the ground up." She shared stories from employees who had reached out to her, describing the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination they witnessed daily. A knock at the door interrupted the presentation. Sarah's assistant entered with breaking news. Miller's public apology video had gone viral, reaching 10 million views. More importantly, it had sparked a nationwide conversation about bias in the service industry. "This is why we're here," said Roberts, standing up to address the room. "We can't wait for incidents to happen before we act. We need to be proactive." He turned to Sarah. "Would you consider heading a task force to implement these changes across all our airlines?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone lit up with a notification. The original video of her confrontation with Miller had just been featured in a major documentary about corporate discrimination. The producers wanted her to be part of their expert panel for a nationwide discussion. "What you're proposing isn't just about airlines," Sarah said, addressing the executives. "It's about setting a new standard for how businesses handle discrimination at every level." She pulled up another presentation, this one showing how her company's new diversity consulting division was already working with hotels, restaurants, and retail chains. The meeting was interrupted again, this time by David Chen calling via video conference. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said excitedly. He shared his screen, showing security footage from his terminal. The new protocols were working so well that their passenger processing time had been cut in half, while customer satisfaction scores had reached record highs. "This is what success looks like," Sarah told the airline executives. "When we eliminate discrimination, everyone benefits. Efficiency improves, customers are happier, and employees feel more valued." As if to prove her point, Chen shared some surprising statistics. Applications to work at his terminal had increased by 300% since the changes were implemented. People wanted to be part of a workplace that took equality seriously. The airline executives exchanged glances, then Roberts spoke again. "We're not just talking about changes to our airlines anymore. We're talking about leading a movement." He looked at Sarah. "How quickly can we start?" Sarah smiled, remembering how different things had been just a week ago. "We can start right now," she said, pulling up a detailed implementation plan. "I've already created a framework that can be adapted for any business." As the meeting continued, Sarah's phone kept buzzing with messages from other companies wanting to learn from her experience. What had started as a confrontation with one prejudiced guard had evolved into a nationwide push for corporate accountability. Looking around the room at the eager faces of airline executives ready to make real changes, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sometimes the worst experiences could lead to the best outcomes if you had the courage to stand up and the wisdom to turn anger into action. 1 month after the incident, Sarah stood at the podium of the National Business Leadership Conference in Chicago. The massive convention center was filled with over 3,000 business leaders, all eager to hear about the transformation her experience had sparked in corporate America. "Change doesn't always come from boardroom decisions," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the hushed audience. "Sometimes it comes from standing your ground at a security checkpoint." Behind her, Screens displayed the impressive results of the past month's initiatives. In the front row sat James Miller, the former security guard, now working as an anti-bias training consultant. His journey from being the face of discrimination to becoming an advocate for change had become its own viral story. He nodded as Sarah described how confronting his own biases had transformed his perspective. Last month, I was just trying to board a plane. Sarah continued, clicking to her next slide. Today, over 500 companies have adopted our new security and anti-discrimination protocols. The screen showed a map of the United States, with dots representing each business that had implemented the changes. David Chen, sitting nearby, smiled proudly. His terminal had become a model for others, hosting weekly tours for business leaders who wanted to see the new systems in action. The security checkpoint where Sarah had faced discrimination was now a training center for progressive corporate policies. But the numbers tell the real story, Sarah said, revealing the latest statistics. Complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped by 70% across participating businesses. Employee satisfaction had increased by 45%, and efficiency metrics were breaking records. During her speech, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. The governor wanted to meet with her about implementing similar protocols across all state-run facilities. What had started in one private terminal was now influencing public policy. Innovation isn't just about creating new things, Sarah told the audience. It's about fixing broken systems. She shared videos from various businesses that had adopted her protocols, hotels where check-in procedures were now standardized, restaurants that had eliminated selective service practices, and retail stores with new customer interaction guidelines. In the middle of her presentation, breaking news flashed across the screens. Congress had just announced hearings on discrimination in private transportation services, and Sarah was invited to testify. Her personal experience had become the catalyst for potential national legislation. The young woman from the Seattle conference who had asked for advice was now running her own consulting firm, helping small businesses implement anti-discrimination measures. Sarah had invited her onto the stage to share her success story, showing how one moment of courage could inspire others to create change. During the Q&A session, a CEO asked about the costs of implementing these changes. Sarah's response was clear. The real question is, what's the cost of not changing? How many talented employees and loyal customers are you losing to discrimination? As if to emphasize her point, David Chen shared the latest figures from his terminal. Revenue had increased by 25% since implementing the new protocols. Other businesses reported similar results. Treating people fairly wasn't just right, it was profitable. After her speech, Sarah met with a group of young entrepreneurs who were developing new technologies to support bias-free business practices. One team had created an app that helped companies track and improve their equality metrics, inspired by the systems Sarah had implemented. The most powerful thing that happened that day wasn't standing up to discrimination, Sarah told them. It was showing others that they could stand up too. She shared stories of employees across the country who had found their voices, knowing they now had support systems in place. As the conference drew to a close, Sarah received another surprising update. James Miller's training program had been picked up by a major educational institution. Future security personnel would learn from his experience, understanding how unconscious bias could affect their decisions. Looking out at the sea of faces in the conference hall, Sarah saw something that moved her deeply. People of all backgrounds, united in their commitment to create fair and equitable spaces. The incident that could have left her bitter had instead sparked a movement for positive change. 1 month ago, I was blocked from boarding a plane, Sarah concluded. Today, we're all boarding a journey toward real corporate change. And this time, everyone has a ticket to ride. 6 months after the incident that changed corporate America, Sarah Thompson returned to the private aviation terminal where it all began. The morning sun caught the new sign at the entrance. Excellence through equality, setting the standard in aviation security. As she walked through the sliding doors, she noticed how different everything felt. The security checkpoint where she had faced discrimination now featured state-of-the-art equipment and a diverse team of security personnel. Above their stations, screens displayed real-time statistics about processing times and customer satisfaction scores. "Welcome back, Miss Thompson," said Maria Rodriguez, the new head of security who had replaced Miller. She had been personally trained under the new protocols that Sarah helped develop. Would you like to see how your innovations have transformed our operations? Sarah smiled, remembering the tension of that day 6 months ago. Now, the terminal was hosting its 100th training session for other facilities. Business leaders from around the world came to learn from their example. As she walked through the terminal, Sarah noticed a wall display titled Our Journey to Change. It showed the timeline of events, starting with her confrontation with Miller, through the implementation of new policies to the present day. Beside it hung framed articles from major newspapers documenting the transformation. Your story changed everything, said David Chen, appearing from his office to greet her. He looked more relaxed now, confident in the positive changes they had achieved. But wait until you see the latest numbers. Chen led her to the conference room where, 6 months ago, they had first discussed reform. Now the room was filled with charts showing impressive statistics: 0 discrimination complaints in the past 5 months, a 50% increase in customer satisfaction, and a 30% improvement in operational efficiency. But the best part, Chen said, pulling up a national database on his tablet, is how far this has spread. The screen showed a map of the country dotted with hundreds of points, each representing a business that had adopted their anti-discrimination protocols. Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. The congressional bill she had helped inspire, the Fair Treatment in Transportation Act, had just passed its final committee vote. Soon, the standards she helped establish would become federal law. As if on cue, a group of business school students entered the terminal. They were part of a new curriculum studying the Thompson method of corporate reform. Sarah had become a case study in how to turn discrimination into institutional change. Ms. Thompson, one student called out, recognizing her. We just finished analyzing your approach in our ethics in business class. Would you mind answering a few questions? Before Sarah could respond, her attention was drawn to a familiar face entering the terminal. It was James Miller, now a respected speaker on corporate reform. He had just finished leading a training session at another facility. Sarah, Miller said, approaching her with genuine respect, I was hoping to run into you today. He held up a copy of his new book, From Bias to Bridge Building, A Security Officer's Journey. The foreword was written by Sarah herself. The students gathered around as Miller shared his perspective on the changes. What happened that day was wrong, he admitted openly. But thanks to Ms. Thompson's response, it became a catalyst for something important. Sarah's assistant interrupted with another update. The diversity consulting division she had created was now working with over 1,000 companies. What started as a response to discrimination had grown into a global movement for corporate equality. Looking around the terminal, Sarah saw her vision fully realized. Every passenger, regardless of their appearance, received the same professional treatment. The security process was both thorough and respectful. The staff reflected the diversity of the communities they served. You know what the best part is? Chen said, showing her one final statistic. Other terminals are reporting the same results. When you treat everyone with respect, everybody wins. As Sarah prepared to board her flight, she passed the spot where she had stood 6 months ago, fighting for her dignity. Now it was marked with a small plaque. On this spot, one woman's courage sparked a movement for change. The terminal buzzed with its usual morning activity, but there was a different energy now. Each interaction, each security check, each passenger experience reflected the new standard they had set. What began as one woman's stand against discrimination had become a blueprint for corporate transformation. Sarah boarded her flight, knowing that her experience had not just changed one terminal or one industry, but had helped reshape the way American businesses thought about equality. As her plane took off into the clear blue sky, she smiled, remembering how sometimes the biggest changes started with one person simply refusing to accept the status quo.